Some promises are born of grief. In the raw, empty hours after a casket is lowered into hard ground, when the mourners have gone home, the food they brought sits untouched on the kitchen table, and the silence of the house presses down on a woman like the weight of all the years she thought she had left. Some promises are born of grief, and they feel in that moment like the most honest thing left in the world. Like the only solid ground. Hazel Pemberton made hers on a Tuesday morning in March of 1879, standing at the kitchen window of the only house she had ever truly called her own, watching frost melt off the glass while the neighbors carried covered dishes up the porch steps behind her. She did not turn around. She watched the frost disappear. First a small clear circle, then spreading. The world outside coming back into focus one slow inch at a time. And she whispered it to herself like a second vow. A wedding, this time, to solitude. Like a choice she was making before anyone could make the choice for her. She had kept that promise every day for 3 years. She had not counted on Warren Cassidy. No one in Crested Butte, Colorado had counted on Warren Cassidy. Quiet as still water, steady as something very deep, with a quality that subtly shifted the atmosphere of a room, without anything specific happening. He carried a depth behind his eyes Hazel couldn't quite name. She noticed it the first afternoon he walked through the door of her bakehouse and asked for a loaf of sourdough in a voice so careful, as if he held something fragile, and she was still noticing it 6 weeks later, against her every intention. Some promises are born of grief, and some promises meet moments they were never built to survive. This is one of those stories. Crested Butte in September of 1882 smelled of pine resin, high altitude, and that distinct cold that descended from the mountains each evening, as if the peaks finally released what they'd held all day. The aspen groves on the upper slopes were just beginning to turn, a slow fire burning downward from the tree line, gold and amber deepening with each sunrise. And the air by 7 o'clock already had that bite, the kind that warned anyone who had seen a Colorado winter exactly what was coming and when. Hazel Pemberton rose before the sun. She always had, even before the bakehouse, even before Thomas. It was the hour she understood best. The kitchen remained dark, the iron range already ticking with the heat she'd banked the night before. The air carried the scent of flour, cold lard, and the sourdough starter she nurtured in a brown crock above the window. The starter was almost 4 years old. She had begun it the autumn before Thomas died, and kept it going after, feeding it every 3 days, the way one cares for anything dependent. By the time she realized her need to keep things alive, the starter was the only thing she had already begun. She was 31 years old. Her hair was the deep auburn of a creek running over copperstone, and she wore it in a braid each morning, coiled and pinned at the nape of her neck, a testament to the efficiency of a woman who had long decided mirrors were for those with time to spare. Her eyes were amber, brown at the edges, gold at the center. Her gaze missed very little. She had opened the bakehouse 14 months after Thomas died, in the front room of the house on Elk Avenue that she had bought outright once the estate was settled. People had told her it was too soon, that she needed more time, that she ought to return to her mother's people in Gunnison, where family and a familiar church awaited. Hazel had thanked them for their concern and simply purchased a second sack of hard winter wheat. By September of 1882, the bakehouse had been operating for nearly 2 years. She sold bread, sourdough, cornbread, a white sandwich loaf on Mondays, and buttermilk biscuits, and a molasses cake on Fridays when she had the time and the inclination, which was most Fridays. By 8 in the morning, she had a line on the porch. By 10, she was usually sold out of everything except the cornbread, which the miners favored, while ranch families often considered it inferior. She kept making it for the miners. She didn't consider it success. She saw it as survival, a skill she had honed to perfection. He came in on a Wednesday, the second week of September, about 20 minutes before she planned to close. The bell above her door was a small one, a brass disc on a leather strip which she'd hung herself one morning, weary of never knowing when a customer had entered. It made a thin, clear sound, and Hazel heard it from the back kitchen and dried her hands on her apron, then pushed through the curtain into the front room. He was standing at the counter, hat in hand. Tall, lean, as men who labor outdoors in wind and cold often were. His tan reached his wrists, stopping precisely where a shirt would have, and his jaw held a slight, off-true angle, as if broken years ago and mended imperfectly. It should have lent him a rough appearance, but instead it spoke of honesty. Dark hair, clearly in need of a trim, and eyes, a clear, quiet green, the color of sagebrush in the low morning light, watchful and still. His hat was already in his hand. Hazel noticed. He looked at what was left on the shelf. A half loaf of sourdough, a cloth-wrapped round of cornbread, 3 biscuits in a basket, and then at her. "I reckon I've come late in the day," he said, his voice low. "You have," Hazel said. "I can sell you what's left, or you can return Friday." "What's here will do, ma'am." He reached into his coat for a coin purse with the unhurried care, like a man who measured every detail. "I'll take the sourdough if that's the price." She named it. He did not flinch, did not argue, didn't try to haggle, as some ranchers did, believing a woman alone might be swayed by persistence. He set the coins on the counter, the exact amount, and she wrapped the bread and set it in his hands. "Thank you," he said. He said it with the quiet conviction of a man who truly meant his words. "You're new," Hazel said. Her tone held no question. "Took over the old Harmon parcel east of town," he said. 3 weeks passed. Warren Cassidy. She didn't offer her name. He didn't ask. He put his hat back on, tucked the bread under his arm, and went out into the September afternoon, the bell giving its thin, clear sound behind him. Hazel stood at the counter. She told herself she was considering the sourdough starter, wondering if she had enough for a second rise tomorrow, but she wasn't thinking about that at all. He returned on Friday, then the following Wednesday, and the Friday after that. He arrived early enough to have his choice of what was on the shelf, a clear sign to Hazel he'd deciphered her schedule and organized his trips to town accordingly. His hat was always in his hand before the door fully closed behind him. He ceased asking questions she'd already answered. He began to say good morning before she did, with the quiet ease of a man settling into a new routine. Hazel observed him with a part of herself she held very still and separate. The part that had watched people her entire life, cataloging them carefully. He was not trying to charm her. That was the first thing she understood, and it took longer than it should have. Men attempting to charm a woman carried a distinct quality. A subtle lean, a tilt forward, a brightness that declared their intent. Warren Cassidy stood at a polite distance and spoke to her like a business associate. Directly, briefly, without embellishment. He never stayed longer than the transaction required. She told herself this was appropriate behavior, yet couldn't shake the annoyance it stirred within her. She learned him the way one learns an unfamiliar landscape. Not all at once, but in glimpses, through the small things people reveal when they believe they aren't being observed. He had worked a cattle outfit in the Texas Panhandle for 7 years before coming north. He had bought the Harmon parcel outright in August, now running a small herd while rebuilding the east fence line, which the previous tenant had neglected badly. He was 34 years old, though he carried himself with the deliberate manner of a man somewhat older. He never said why he had left Texas, and she did not ask. There was a look that crossed his face sometimes, when he thought no one was watching. Not grief exactly, but its residue. Like a field in the 3rd year after a fire. Something had grown back, yet the pattern of what had burned remained visible. Hazel recognized it, because she wore that same expression herself on days she forgot to arrange her own features. Crested Butte held fewer than 600 souls, and every single one of them had an opinion. By Warren Cassidy's 4th week of Friday visits, Hazel had been informed by Berta Coles at the post office, Mildred Travers at the dry goods counter, and old Pete Sims at the feed store that the new man on the Harmon parcel seemed to be paying her particular attention. Berta delivered the news with the brightness of someone who considered it long overdue. Mildred spoke with the caution of a woman who had known Hazel for 3 years, understanding the exact look in her eyes when she wanted people to leave well enough alone. Pete Sims conveyed it by saying nothing at all, merely watching Hazel walk past with the long, quiet silence of a man who had buried 2 wives and knew better than to editorialize. Hazel thanked Berta, told Mildred she was selling him bread, and brought Pete a slice of molasses cake, knowing he never asked for anything, yet deserved it. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with her quilting, trying to think of anything but green eyes, and the peculiar way a man could stand at a counter, shifting the feel of a room without doing a single identifiable thing. She was 31 years old. She had kept the promise she made for 3 years without difficulty. It was a reasonable promise, rooted in a clear reason. She had been a married woman, loving her husband with everything she possessed. She had witnessed the cost of that love once it was gone, and decided rationally and without self-pity that she would not again place herself in the path of such a cost. She stitched a red square to a white one. She wasn't thinking about Warren Cassidy. She was absolutely thinking about Warren Cassidy, and she resented it with the specific low-grade annoyance one reserves for a sudden weather change. Not for any single element, but for the situation in general. The first real snow came in mid-October, 2 weeks early and without warning. Hazel was in the back kitchen finishing her second batch of the day when the light changed, going flat and gray-white, a change she'd learned to read from 3 years of watching Colorado skies. That particular flattening meant weather had already arrived somewhere above the peaks and was working its way down. She pulled her bread from the oven, carried it to the cooling rack, and was banking the range for the afternoon when the front door opened, letting in a wall of cold air and 3 inches of wind-driven snow across her threshold. Warren Cassidy stood in the doorway with snow on his hat, snow on his shoulders, and the expression of a man who has been badly wrong about how long he had before a storm hit. "I left the parcel at noon," he said. "It turned fast," Hazel said. She looked past him at the street, which had mostly disappeared. "Where's your horse?" "Mrs. Alcott's barn. She said she didn't mind." "Mrs. Alcott never minds anything. She'd take in a mountain lion if it knocked politely." Hazel looked at the window. The snow now fell sideways, a northwest storm that meant business. "You won't make it back before dark." He stood in her doorway, hat in hand, not quite crossing the threshold. She understood. She hesitated for exactly the amount of time that felt honest, weighing the options against the snow, the darkening sky, and the sharp cold pressing in around the edges of the door. "Come in," she said. "I have coffee." He came in. She hung his coat on the peg behind the door. It was heavy with cold, the wool damp at the collar, and he sat at her kitchen table and she poured coffee and they both held their cups without saying anything for a while. It was the kind of quiet she had only ever known with Thomas. Not the silence of 2 strangers still finding their footing, but the quiet ease of 2 people comfortable enough to forego words. It settled around them like something familiar, startling Hazel so much she almost spoke just to break it. "You live here alone," he said. Not a question. 3 years, she said. "The bakehouse. Was that yours before or after?" "After." She looked at her cup. "I needed something for my hands to do, something that demanded action every day, whether I felt like it or not." He turned his cup on the table, the ceramic scraping the wood in a slow, half-circle arc. "I know that feeling," he said. He said it simply, without drama, the way one utters something they've earned the right to say. Hazel looked up. He was watching the window, the white blankness outside, the snow pressing against the glass. For a moment, he was somewhere else. Briefly. Somewhere she couldn't follow. Then he returned, his gaze finding hers, and he didn't look away. "I'm sorry about your husband," he said. "I didn't tell you about my husband." "Mrs. Alcott," he said. Hazel exhaled. "Of course. She also told me you make the best molasses cake in the county, that you don't accept charity, and that anyone who tries to court you gets a look that would stop a runaway team." He paused. She seemed to be offering it as a caution. Heat bloomed in Hazel's cheeks without her permission. She felt a surge of irritation. "And yet, here you are," she said, a challenge in her tone. "Here I am," he said. Simply. As if it were a fact, not a declaration. Yet it was both, and they both knew it. Neither spoke further, and somehow that silence was more significant than any words they could have exchanged. The storm pressed against the windows. The range ticked. The coffee cooled in their cups while they drank it and talked about small things. The condition of the Harmon fence, the difference between Texas blue northers and Colorado mountain snow, how certain kinds of cold cleared the mind while others simply made everything harder. He laughed once, quietly, at something she said about the cornbread and the miners, a genuine laugh, nothing rehearsed, and Hazel felt it like a hand touching something she'd kept under glass for 3 years. He left when the storm eased at dusk. His boots crunched in 8 inches of new snow, breath misting in small clouds in the blue evening air. He said good evening and went, and Hazel stood in the open doorway, watching him until he turned the corner toward Mrs. Alcott's barn. Then she stepped inside, stood in her kitchen, and stared at the 2 cups on the table. She washed them immediately. She dried them and put them back on the shelf. She went to bed and stared at the dark ceiling for a long time, listening to the wind ease and the quiet reclaim the house, and thought about promises. Thomas Pemberton had been a good man, a kind man, the kind of kindness that wasn't a performance. She had loved him the way one breathes, unthinking, automatic, necessary, and entirely natural. The world with him in it made a different kind of sense than the world without him. He had died in March of 1879, 8 days after a fever began, a sickness that should not have taken him. She had been 28. They had been married 4 years. She had been sitting right here at this table when the doctor emerged from the bedroom, his gaze meeting hers. She understood before he opened his mouth. The silence that followed was unlike any silence she had known. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something enormous and permanent, like a physical object in the room she would forever have to navigate around. In the days that followed, the receiving of food, the making of arrangements, the returning of casserole dishes she barely remembered accepting, she had understood, quietly and with absolute clarity, what love cost. Not the love itself. The cost of the love when it was gone. The specific damage of having given everything, only to find everything gone. She had made the promise out of that understanding. It was not self-pity and it was not bitterness. It was a choice, much like choosing a coat before winter arrived. She had looked at the damage and decided she would not again stand in its path. She would live and work and be useful and be alone and be safe. For 3 years it had held perfectly. She lay in the dark now and told herself that nothing had happened today. A man had sheltered from a storm in her kitchen, shared coffee, and talked of ordinary things. That was all. She had been polite, hospitable in the manner expected of a woman of good character. She had done nothing requiring examination. She thought about the way he had said, "I know that feeling," and the underlying thing, its exact quality, not borrowed sympathy, but the real thing, the kind that costs something. And she pressed her face into the pillow and told herself firmly to go to sleep. Sleep did not come easily. He came on Fridays and Tuesdays both. She knew why he'd added Tuesdays. She discounted leftover biscuits, a fact he'd figured out around his 3rd week. But she also knew it wasn't about the biscuits, and they both understood this without a single word. November came, and the days shrank to something serious. The light turning low and amber by 3 in the afternoon, the cold settling in for good. He would arrive, stamping snow from his boots, hat in hand. Sometimes, when the morning was slow and no other customers were present, they would talk while she folded dough or counted the day's receipts. He mentioned the fence progress, the herd, the distinct difference between Texas cold, which came at you like a wall, and Colorado cold, which descended from above, filling everything. He mentioned once a man named Cal Briggs. He spoke the name with the particular weight one gives to names that have become monuments. He did not explain further, and Hazel did not ask. She filed away the name. One afternoon in the 2nd week of November, as she closed the shutters on the front room, she found a small piece of paper folded twice and slipped beneath the flour tin on the counter. She nearly missed it. It was barely half the size of her palm. She unfolded it. It was a drawing, done in pencil, quick and sure, on the back of what appeared to be a hardware receipt. Her front window, viewed from the outside, the bread shelf visible through the glass, the lamp on the counter, a shape that might have been her in the background, working at something. He had drawn it the way he approached most things, simply, precisely, capturing the essence with the fewest marks. It was the window she gazed out of every morning of her life. In the lower corner, in small, careful handwriting, "Good morning from yesterday." Hazel stood at the counter, the paper held in both hands, for a long time. Then she walked to the kitchen and lifted the lid of the bread tin where she kept her grocery accounts, her seed receipts, and the handful of things she wasn't yet ready to decide about. She placed the drawing at the bottom of the stack. She put the lid back on and went to finish closing up. She didn't look at it again that day. She thought about it through most of the evening. He asked her to the November social at the Odd Fellows Hall on the first Saturday of the month. She said no. She said it cleanly, like severing a thread. Not unkindly, but without leaving any loose ends. She watched something flicker across his face, then be tucked away with the efficiency of a man practiced at not burdening others with his feelings. He said, "Of course," took his bread, said good day, and left. She went to the social anyway, because Mildred Travers had essentially made it a condition of their friendship. She stood at the edge of the room with a cup of hard cider, watched people dance, talked to acquaintances she'd known for years, and went home at 9, feeling the specific loneliness of having been in a room full of people and experienced none of it. Warren Cassidy had not been there. She hadn't been looking for him. She had been looking for him. At home, she sat at the kitchen table, took the drawing from the bread tin, placed it on the table, and looked at it. Her window, from the outside, "Good morning from yesterday." She had hurt him. She didn't know why this felt so consequential. She knew exactly why. The next Tuesday, she opened early and made molasses cake. The whole production, 2 hours of work, for a thing she almost never sold because it took too long. She wrapped 2 slices in paper and placed them on the shelf beneath the counter. He didn't come Tuesday. He came Friday, later than usual. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the fence line. He said good morning. She said good morning. She set the bread on the counter, then the wrapped cake beside it, naming only the price of the bread. He looked at the package for a moment, then at her. "Hazel," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it caught her somewhere unexpected. She had been composing something to say since Tuesday. It hadn't survived contact with his voice. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Her voice emerged lower than she intended, more honest than she intended. She pressed her hands flat on the counter. "I told myself after Thomas, I made a promise. I meant it. I have kept it for 3 years and it has served me." He was very still. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to know." "I whispered it," she said. And now the words came, and she couldn't seem to stop them. The morning after the burial. Standing at that window. She looked toward the front window, her window from the outside, in his drawing. "I said I would never love again, and I meant it the way one means something that costs them something to say." She looked at him. He was watching her with those clear, quiet eyes, and his expression was not pity, and it was not impatience. And it was not the soft, careful look of a man managing a delicate situation. It was something she had no word for. Something patient and unmoving, like stone that had stood long enough to be a landmark. He picked up the bread, then the cake. Then he said gently, without any performance about it, "You never promised me." It went through her like cold water immediately followed by warmth, the way stepping in from a hard wind feels. The cold first, then the shelter, then the realization that one has been cold for a long time and didn't fully know it. Hazel stood at the counter. "No," she said after a long moment. "I never promised you." He held her gaze for a breath longer, then nodded once. The way a man nods when something important has been acknowledged, and he won't make more of it than it is. He said good day. He went out. The bell made its thin, clear sound. Hazel stood in the empty front room for a long time, her hands still flat on the counter, her heart doing something she'd told herself for 3 years it wouldn't do again. He didn't push. She had expected something. Not pressure exactly, but a shift in the quality of things. A tilt forward. The way a man behaves when he knows he has gained ground. There was none of that. He came on Tuesdays and Fridays, the same as always. He bought his bread and sometimes the biscuits, talked about the parcel, the cattle, the particular violence of December cold on fence-line posts. He was exactly himself, no more and no less than he had always been. He was simply there. And Hazel began to understand that for Warren Cassidy, his presence was the entire argument. She invited him to supper on the second Sunday of December. She told herself she'd made too much soup. In truth, she had made the soup specifically because she was going to invite him. She was aware of the contradiction and felt no particular obligation to resolve it. He sat at her kitchen table, food before him, a fire in the range, the snow quiet outside. They talked for nearly 3 hours. She told him about Thomas, the actual man, the one she kept inside where no one could ask clumsy questions about him. His habit of reading almanac entries aloud at dinner as if they were news, his singing, which was terrible and entirely sincere, his extraordinary pride in the rhubarb he grew in the side garden, and the rhubarb's extraordinary indifference to his efforts. It didn't hurt the way she'd been certain it would. Warren told her about Cal Briggs, about the Texas Panhandle, about the outfit they'd run together for 4 years, about the accident, a section of bad fence, a horse spooked by a rattler, and the crushing helplessness of watching someone you were responsible for get badly hurt while you stood 6 feet away, unable to do anything useful. Cal had lived, but not the same way. Warren had left because staying had become a form of punishment he was no longer sure he deserved to continue inflicting upon himself, which wasn't the same as being sure he deserved to stop. He stated it plainly, without editorializing, without asking for anything in return. Hazel refilled his bowl of soup. He looked at her. "You didn't have to tell me all of that," she said. "I wanted you to know it," he said, "before anything else happened. It seemed right that you should." She looked at him across the table. This careful man with his quiet eyes and his honest jaw, sitting in her kitchen as if he had been coming to supper for years. "Before anything else happens," she said. "If that's all right," he said. She thought about the kitchen window, about the frost, about that Tuesday morning in March, when she had made a promise to herself and kept it so long it had become a kind of architecture, load-bearing and invisible. "Yes," she said. "That's all right." Winter settled around them the way Colorado winters do, completely without apology. The mountains stood white above the tree line, the sky a hard, bright blue in the mornings, everything in between the color of old silver. Warren came for supper on Sundays. He helped her carry flour on Saturdays when he was in town, and she fed him biscuits for it, a transaction they both understood without discussion. He learned the particular sound the range made when running too hot, a specific clicking she'd stopped noticing, but somehow he had found. She learned he took his coffee without sugar, but always with a second cup, and that he was left-handed, but wrote with his right, a detail she discovered by accident when she handed him a pencil for something and watched him shift it without thinking. He had been learning the mouth organ badly, he admitted, on Tuesday evenings when no one was around to be subjected to it. She did not ask to hear it. He did not offer. That felt somehow like a shared, unspoken understanding. He carved her a new wooden spoon for the bread dough. The old one had cracked along the handle, and left it on the counter one Thursday morning without ceremony. Simply there, no note. It was exactly the right size and weight. She used it the next morning before she'd consciously thought about it, and the bread turned out fine. On the last day of December, she walked out to the Harmon parcel. She told herself she'd made a small cake for no particular reason. In truth, she had made the cake specifically because she had been thinking about the new year and what she wanted to be standing next to when it arrived, and she was tired of lying to herself about things already decided. She wrapped the cake and put her coat on, and walked the track east of town in the late afternoon light, which was orange, long, very cold, and very clear. He was on the porch when she came up the track, splitting wood, the axe rising and falling with the even rhythm of a man who did this every day. He saw her coming and set the axe down and straightened up, and there was that thing in his face, not hidden, not performed, just open. The thing she had watched him carefully not show her for 4 months. Finally present because she was walking toward him on the last day of December with a cake under her arm, and they both knew what that meant. She came up the steps. She handed him the cake. He set it on the porch rail. The sun was setting over the mountains to the west, its light sweeping low and orange across the snow, turning everything the color of old gold. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. His did too. "Happy New Year," she said. "Happy New Year," he said. He offered his hand. Not his arm, just his hand, palm up, open. The hand of a man who left the choice where it belonged. It was calloused from fence work and chapped at the knuckles from the cold, and it was the most straightforward thing she had been offered in 3 years. She thought about the kitchen window, the frost, that Tuesday morning, and the promise she had made to herself while the neighbors carried food up her porch steps. She took his hand. They stood at the edge of 1883 on the cold porch in the last of the orange light, looking at the mountains. Neither said anything because nothing needed saying that words were equal to, and they were both patient people who had learned the hard way that things worth having arrive in their own time, not a moment before. Below in the valley, Crested Butte settled into the quiet of a Sunday evening. The aspens stood bare and silver against the snow. Somewhere a horse shifted in a barn. The cold pressed in from the mountains, clean and enormous, smelling of pine, altitude, and the coming night. Hazel felt the space beside her, the space she had carefully kept empty for 3 years, on principle, on purpose, with her whole deliberate heart, fill, quietly, and without ceremony, with the warmth of a man who had never asked her for a promise, yet had simply been there. She tightened her grip on his hand just slightly. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The following letter was found in the breast pocket of Warren Cassidy's work coat when Hazel was washing it in the spring of 1883, after he had moved his belongings from the Harmon parcel into the house on Elk Avenue. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She recognized the date, December 1882, and the particular fold of the paper, small and careful, the same fold as the drawing he had left beneath the flour tin. She asked him about it that evening at supper. He said he had written it the night of the snowstorm, while she had her back turned at the range. He said he had never sent it because it wasn't meant for sending. It was meant for himself. She kept it in the bread tin at the bottom, beneath the grocery accounts. December 1882. Hazel. I don't know how to write this without sounding like a man who has thought too hard about something. I have thought too hard about it. I'm not sorry. You said you made a promise. I believe you. I know what those kinds of promises feel like. The ones you make from the worst place you've ever been, when they feel like the only honest thing left. I made one too, coming north from Texas. Mine was simpler. Just keep working and don't ask for anything you haven't earned. I'm not asking you to break yours. That's not something I would ever ask. But I want you to know that I have been buying bread from you for 6 weeks, for reasons that have nothing to do with bread. I think you know that. I think you've known it longer than I have, and you've been watching to see what I would do about it. So far, what I've done is show up on Fridays and not make you uncomfortable, which is the least I can do and also all I can offer right now. If the promise serves you, keep it. If you decide someday it has served its purpose and you are done with it, well, I'll be here. I bought the Harmon parcel intending to stay. Warren Cassidy.